Hello and welcome to Just Crazy Things. If you enjoy mind-bending stories and chilling mysteries, make sure to subscribe. And don't forget to tell me where you're watching from. I hope you're ready for today's crazy tale.
When my friend warned me about the forest, I laughed it off. Now, I can't stop hearing the howl. I know it's still out there, waiting for me. I never planned to stay in the cabin for long. It was supposed to be a retreat, a place to quiet my thoughts, far from the city's suffocating noise. When my friend Chris offered me his family's old cabin up north, he called it rustic. That was generous. The place was a relic, sagging under the weight of neglect, surrounded by a forest so dense it seemed alive. Solitude was the point. Forgetting was the goal. The drive was a blur of empty roads and wilderness, the kind that makes you feel untethered from reality. By the time I had arrived, the sun was sinking behind the trees, casting shadows that stretched like skeletal fingers over the clearing. The cabin loomed over there, stubborn and solitary, like it had been waiting for me. Chris had mentioned the forest with a half smile 2 weeks earlier. "Some people say weird stuff happens out there," he said, swirling his beer. "Just don't let it get to you." I'd laughed it off, even teased him. But now, standing in the shadow of that oppressive tree line, his words replayed in my mind like a quiet warning. As I unpacked, the first cries of the forest rose in the air, sharp, shrill, and inhuman. My skin prickled, but I forced a laugh. "Just an owl," I muttered, though my voice didn't quite sound like my own. Inside, the cabin smelled like decay and disuse. The generator coughed to life, throwing weak light into the gloom. I grabbed a book, determined to distract myself, but the sounds of the forest kept breaking through, a symphony of distant rustling and faint echoes. It wasn't until the scratching started that I put the book down for good. It was subtle at first, a faint scrape against the back wall. My fingers froze on the page as I strained to hear. Another scrape, slow and deliberate, like someone testing the wood. "Chris?" I called, my voice wavering. I knew it wasn't him. Chris wouldn't drive hours into the wilderness to prank me. But the alternative, that something else was out there, was a thought I wasn't ready to entertain. I grabbed the flashlight and opened the back door, the beam trembling as it cut through the darkness. Nothing. Just swaying grass and shadows that seemed to shift when I wasn't looking. I forced the door shut, locking it with a shaky hand. "It's just an animal," I whispered, trying to steady my breathing. But deep down, I felt it. That itch in the back of my mind, the primal knowledge that I wasn't alone. The sound didn't stop. Through the night, it continued. Soft crunches of leaves, faint creaks of the cabin, and once a sound so close and deliberate it could only have been breathing. I told myself to sleep, but each time I closed my eyes, my body jolted awake, my nerves screaming at me to stay alert. When morning finally came, I stepped outside to investigate. The sight froze me in place. Tracks, clawed and impossibly large, circled the cabin in uneven loops. They weren't like anything I had seen before, and their size suggested something wrong. The day passed in a haze, my mind trapped in an endless loop of questions. What had made those tracks? Why was it circling the cabin? I busied myself with menial tasks, splitting wood, scrubbing the kitchen counter, but my gaze kept drifting to the tree line. The forest seemed to press closer, its shadows darker and more tangled. I locked every door and window as night fell. The noises started earlier this time, scratching, followed by the low rumble of something alive. Not just alive, but aware. The sound wasn't random. It moved, circled, tested. I clutched the flashlight, my knuckles white against the cold metal. Then came the howl. A deep, mournful wail that carried through the trees. It wasn't a wolf. It wasn't anything I could name. The sound crawled under my skin, stirring something primal and ancient. I wanted to believe I was imagining it, but the fear was too real. My mind spiraled. What if it gets in? What if I can't stop it? What if it already knows how this ends? Sleep was out of the question. I spent the night staring at the door, flinching at every noise. By the third day, I was unraveling. Every shadow felt like a threat. Every gust of wind a whisper of something hunting me. The solitude that once felt freeing now felt like a trap. As dusk fell, I set up crude traps around the cabin. Pots, pans, anything to give me warning. It was ridiculous, childish even, but it was all I could do. I was adjusting one of the traps when I saw it. A shape moved in the trees, just beyond the reach of my flashlight. My breath hitched. The beam wavered, catching the glint of something watching me. Eyes. Amber and glowing, brimming with a terrible intelligence. The light flickered, and the figure melted into the darkness. My heart raced as I stumbled backwards, the weight of its gaze lingering long after it was gone. That night, the cabin was a prison. I sat by the fire, shotgun across my lap, jumping at every creak and groan. The howling returned, closer now. Then the scraping began again, this time against the front door. I rose shakily, the shotgun trembling in my hands. "Leave!" I shouted, my voice cracking. The scraping stopped. For a moment I thought it was over. Then came the growl, a deep, guttural sound that shook the air. My chest tightened as I aimed at the door. The silence that followed was unbearable, every second stretching into eternity. Then the windows shattered. Glass exploded inward as something massive lunged through, a grotesque hybrid of man and beast, its fur bristling, its eyes burning with malevolent glee. I didn't think. I didn't plan. As the creature lunged, instincts buried in ancient parts of my brain took over. My first shot barely slowed it, but the deafening roar of the shotgun gave me a few precious seconds to move. I bolted through the back door, slamming it behind me as I stumbled into the forest. The night swallowed me whole. The trees pressed in, their branches clawing at my skin as I ran blindly through the undergrowth. My breaths came in shallow gasps, the cold air biting at my lungs. Somewhere behind me, the creature howled, a sound that reverberated through the darkness, rattling my bones. It was playing with me. I could feel it. The forest was a maze, every shadow a potential threat, every sound a harbinger of death. I tripped and fell, the earth rising to meet me in a brutal embrace. Pain shot through my knees and hands, but I scrambled to my feet, terrified of what might catch me if I stayed down. I felt its presence more than saw it, a shadow that moved too fast, too deliberate. My flashlight flickered, its beam catching a brief flash of fur in those terrible eyes. I wanted to scream, but my voice was locked behind a wall of sheer panic. It could have caught me, I know that. It was faster, stronger, more capable in every way. But it didn't. It wanted me to keep running. Why? Why didn't it end this? What did it want? The questions spiraled, my mind grasping at answers even as my body screamed for rest. By dawn, I was completely lost. The forest stretched endlessly, a labyrinth of gnarled roots and towering trees. Every direction looked the same, the light barely penetrating the dense canopy above. My legs trembled with exhaustion, my throat raw from gasping for air. Exhaustion clouded my mind, leaving only fear, but only one thought stood out above the chaos. It's not over. It's never going to be over. That's when I stumbled into the clearing. It was unlike anything I'd ever seen before, a stark contrast to the suffocating forest around it. The ground was bare and scorched, the heavy air with the scent of ash and decay. At the center stood a stone altar, its surface carved with strange symbols that seemed to shift under my gaze. The sun cast harsh shadows over the bones scattered around it. Human bones, picked clean and gleaming white. My stomach churned, the sight almost too much to bear. This wasn't just an animal. This was something older, something far beyond my comprehension. This was its domain. I was trespassing in a place I did not belong, and I realized then that I had been led here. A growl rumbled behind me, low and deliberate. I froze, every nerve screaming in warning as I turned. The dogman stood at the edge of the clearing, its hulking form illuminated in the morning light. It was larger than before, its muscles rippling beneath its dark fur. Those glowing eyes locked on the mine, and I saw it. Recognition. It wasn't just hunting me. It was toying with me. This wasn't an animal. It was a predator, intelligent and malevolent. It was in control, and I was just the game. My fingers tightened around the shotgun, the only barrier between me and certain death. The creature's growl deepened as it stepped forward, its lips pulling back to reveal rows of razor-sharp teeth. This is it. The end. No one would ever know what happened to me, why I vanished without a trace. "Stay back!" I shouted, my voice cracking under the weight of my fear. The dogman didn't stop. It moved slowly, deliberately, savoring every step as it closed the distance. I fired, the blast echoing through the clearing. The creature flinched but didn't fall. Blood matted its fur, but its movements were unbothered, as though pain meant nothing to it. Desperation surged through me. My body acted on autopilot, grabbing a jagged bone from the ground and swinging it wildly as the shotgun fell from my grasp. The bone caught it across the muzzle, and it let out a guttural snarl, more annoyance than pain. But it was enough. I ran. The forest blurred around me, my legs screaming in protest as I forced them to move. Every second felt stolen, every step closer to freedom or death. I could hear it behind me, crashing through the undergrowth, its growls reverberating through the trees. I bursted from the forest and stumbled back towards the cabin, slamming the door behind me and collapsing against it. My chest heaved, my hands trembling so violently I could barely think. The growling started again, louder this time, reverberating through the walls. It was everywhere, surrounding me. I pressed my hands to my ears, trying to block it out, but it seeped into my mind, into my very bones. The first rays of sunlight crept through the trees, washing the forest in an eerie golden light. The growling stopped. The silence that followed was worse, heavy and oppressive, broken only by the sound of my ragged breathing. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed the car keys from the table, every muscle in my body screaming in protest as I stumbled outside. The woods were deathly quiet, as if the creature had never been there at all. I sped down the gravel road, the cabin shrinking in my rearview mirror. My mind raced, the memories replaying like a horror film I couldn't escape. The house, the glowing eyes, the altar. I couldn't shake the feeling that I hadn't escaped, that it had let me go. By the time that I had reached a gas station, I was trembling so badly I could barely keep my grip on the steering wheel. I broke down the moment I stepped out of the car, tears streaming down my face as the reality of what had happened crashed over me. The police didn't believe me. They found nothing at the cabin. No tracks, no broken windows, nothing in the woods. Just a rotten structure with nothing out of place. But I know what I saw. I know what followed me. And sometimes, in the dead of night, when the wind was just right, I still hear it. A howl, long and mournful, calling out from the distance. And I know it's not finished with me. Hello all. I'm new to Reddit, and I'm here to tell you about my strange discovery in the forest of Oregon. For a bit of the backstory, my name is Kurt, and I'm an amateur cryptozoologist. And when I say amateur, I mean amateur. I believe in Bigfoot and Nessie and UFOs, and I know something here or there about mythology. Anyhow, I have lived in Oregon all 40 years of my life, and I have always been curious about the massive forests all around where I lived. What could be hiding in those trees just out of sight? Such curiosity is how I found myself searching the local folklore on anything strange or unheard of in the forests nearby. One day in the fall of 2006, I found myself in a small diner outside of Junction City, a small farming town north of where I lived. I was sitting there drinking my coffee when I overheard two old gentlemen speaking to each other at the other end of the bar table.
I'm telling you, Bill, I saw it. It was looking right at me.
Horse shit, Frank. You were probably drunk knowing you.
I swear, Bill, God's honest truth. It was just like the stories your dad used to tell us.
My pa was as much of a drunk as you are, probably more.
As they continued to speak to each other, I moved down the bar towards them. Excuse me, gentlemen. I couldn't help but overhear your conversation. Tell me, what did you see? The skinnier of the two, Bill, rolled his eyes at me, but Frank continued.
I saw the lurker,
he said, excited that someone cared to hear his story. The lurker? I asked, unsure of what he meant. He leaned in close and said,
The lurker is a local mystery. It lives in the woods watching us.
He paused and took a swig of his beer.
I was out stalking one of the local trails looking for a whitetail. While I was trudging through the brush, I heard a loud crackling sound in the trees ahead. I stopped to see what it could be, thinking it was just a cougar or a deer. When I saw one of the trees move as if it turned away from me in that brief moment, I saw two gleaming orange eyes looking like two burning coals.
Bill let out a scuff. More like you saw someone's taillights.
I know the difference between taillights and eyes, Bill,
Frank exclaimed as he shot his head in Bill's direction. How do you know that it was the lurker? I interjected.
Folks have been seeing it for years, and it's always described the same. Frank continued.
What did you do next?
Nothing. I blinked, and just like that, it was gone again as if it had never been there. Then I made my way back to the pickup and headed back home.
I sipped from my coffee as I contemplated Frank's tale. The exhilaration of finding something unknown crept up my spine. Where was this? I asked, trying to downplay my excitement. Frank looked at me with a twinkle of suspicion in his eyes.
Why do you want to know?
Morbid curiosity. I'm doing research for a blog on folklore. Frank scratched the back of his head uncomfortably.
All right. It was on a game trail out by Fern Ridge. It's not far from a hiking trail that's visited often.
I thanked him, paid for my coffee, then left. I was actually familiar with the hiking trail Frank had told me about, so I headed straight there. I arrived at Fern Ridge later that afternoon and made my way down the hiking trail towards the woods. Soon enough, I found the game trail that Frank had told me about. As I made my way through the underbrush, I felt the tingle of my hairs standing up in excitement. The foliage got thicker and thicker as I continued. Suddenly, I lost my footing and fell into the bushes. When I looked down towards my feet, I saw a huge hole that I had slipped into. I got up and brushed myself off and inspected the hole. It was about 3 feet wide and about 1 foot deep. I was lucky I hadn't really hurt myself. Then I noticed that there was a bunch of loose soil both in and around the hole. It looked like the hole had been by a tree uprooted, only there was no fallen tree nearby. I felt a shiver up my spine. I couldn't tell why. I shook my head, thinking an animal had just been digging in the dirt. But as I looked up the trail, I saw another hole about 15 feet away, and another, and another. If I didn't know any better, I would have said that they were footprints. I felt a lump forming in my throat and the sudden urge to follow the trail growing in the back of my head. Against my better judgment, I began to follow the trail of footprints. The excitement of finding something truly undiscovered was too enticing to ignore. As I continued, a little voice in my head began to implore me not to follow, but that voice was little more than a whisper. Soon, I found the trail leading to a small clearing. The prints stopped exactly where I was standing. I looked around and saw no trace of the prints. I looked about and saw that the sun was starting to set. I must have really lost track of time. I turned around, making one last pass at the clearing, when a cacophony of screeches shot up from the trees just to my left. I nearly jumped out of my skin as a murder of crows came bursting through the trees circling above the clearing. They flew in the air like a black cloud, slowly spiraling towards the ground, feeling a sudden pull, drawing me towards where they were landing. As I made my way closer, my skin began to crawl as I smelt the putrid stench of rot in the air. My heart stopped as I looked down. Laying in the middle of the clearing was a body torn to pieces, entrails strewn around like streamers. I turned away, retching up what little I had in my stomach. I pulled myself back up, my eyes locked with the dead puffy eyes and that shattered remnants of its skull. One of the larger crows landed there, cocking its head at me curiously. It squawked and pecked at the wet puffy eye, pulling it free with a wet sucking sound. It quickly gobbled up the eye. I was too shocked and filled with too much disbelief to move. The crow tilted its head at me again, and for a brief moment, I could have sworn I saw a glint of orange in the bird's eye. It screeched and flew away. As it did, all of my senses slowly returned to me. I felt my arms start to move frantically to my phone. I scrambled to dial 911. A woman's voice immediately answered. 911 helpline. Please state the nature of your emergency.
Hi, oh God, I'd like to report a dead body.
Okay, sir. Please tell me your name.
I felt my tongue glued to the roof of my mouth as I tried to answer. My name is Kurt Walsh. I'm off of a game trail just off of Fern Ridge. I was going for a walk and I found... Oh God, I can't even tell. Ma'am, it's bad. Please send someone. She tried to calm me down, but all I could do was hear the crows. They began to squawk in a more full chorus.
Kurt, I need you to tell me if the officers and paramedics can get to you.
The bird's squawking grew louder. I clutched my head as my ears began to ring. What? I shouted into the phone, and she responded louder.
Can the paramedics and officers get to you?
I'm not sure. I'm off the usual trail about a quarter of a mile. The birds kept calling out, trying to drown out all the other sounds. My ears began to ring louder, and the woman's voice was a muffled mess. I felt an ear-piercing yell tear out of my lungs.
Shut up!
Suddenly, the birds all stopped and cranked their heads towards me. There was an uncomfortable silence that made all the worse now that the noise was gone. The crows spread their wings and took to the sky, flying towards the slowly sinking sun. As I watched, I heard the woman.
Kurt, are you okay?
I placed the phone back to my ear. Yes, sorry, there was a group of crows. They led me to the body, and they were being loud. I'm sorry. She hesitated, then a soft voice replied.
It's okay. The officers are on their way. Can you help them find the body?
Yes. I could go off trail and lead the officers here. She spoke softly over the phone.
Okay, would you like me to stay on call with you until you find them?
I stuttered, my mind is still a whirl from the sound of the crows and the discovery at my feet. Yes, please, miss.
Liz.
She responded softly.
My name is Liz.
As I walked back to the main trail, I spoke to Liz, explaining why I was out here and how the crows had led me to the body. She spoke softly to me, trying to keep me calm. She seemed sweet and kind over the phone. I would have asked for more pleasant company, but given the circumstances, I decided now was not the time. As I reached the trail a half an hour later, I saw the lights flickering from the officers and paramedics. All right, I'm back at the main trail. Thank you, Liz, for the calming conversation. She spoke softly and said,
It's all right, Kurt. I hope you are okay and the paramedics can help you.
I felt a pang in my stomach as I knew the conversation was ending. I blurted out, Can I get your number? She chuckled over the other end.
Well, this is the strangest way a guy's ever asked for that. But sure, why not?
I pulled out my pocketbook and wrote down the numbers she gave me. We exchanged pleasantries, and the call ended. Soon, I brought the officers and the paramedics around to the clearing, and they began to investigate the body as I told them the whole story. How I had been out there following some tracks, how the crows startled me, and I followed them to the body. One of the officers looked at me strangely. He was an older man, maybe in his late 50s, his name badge gleaming in the flask light, Lesky. You a journo? I shook my head slowly. No, why do you ask? Because it sounds like you were looking for the lurker. I felt my stomach twist slightly. I was. Is that a problem? Lesky slowly adjusted his cap. Listen, kid. People who go looking for old ghost stories usually find nothing but trouble. So do me a favor and my guys here a favor and quit while you're ahead. A new twinge of morbid curiosity tinged up my spine.
What makes you say that? He pulled a cigarette from his coat pocket.
The last time some city slicker came here to look for the lurker, he wound up dead.
His eyes trailed to the macabre strewn corpse.
And it was about as pretty as this.
I raised my eyebrows. What are you saying? A local legend did this?
All I'm saying is that there's something in these woods, and it wants to be left alone.
A thin trail of smoke left his mouth as he flicked the barely started cigarette onto the ground, stomping it into the blackish mud. He turned away from me and started telling his men to finish up as the paramedics were almost finished packing up the body. Am I done here? I asked one of the officers. He nodded to me.
If you're feeling well enough to drive, you could head home now. We may call you in for another statement once the coroner report comes in.
I nodded, thanked him, and turned around to leave. As I slowly made my way back towards the edge of the clearing, I caught something just on the other end. 2 gleaming eyes, like burning coals. I blinked my eyes and shook my head. They were gone just as soon as they had appeared. I shuddered, thinking my mind was playing tricks on me as I made my way back to my car. I couldn't help but shake the feeling I was being watched. You're not gonna believe what I just heard, Mark said, his eyes wide with excitement as he stepped into the dimly lit camp store. What's up, man? Dave replied, barely glancing up from the map spread out on the counter. Some locals were talking about Bigfoot sightings around here, Mark said, setting a bag of marshmallows next to the canned beans. Dave snorted. Bigfoot? Really? Did they mention unicorns or leprechauns too? The two friends shared a laugh, but Mark's expression remained earnest. No, seriously. They said there have been reports of missing campers and some tracks that can't be explained. The camp store owner, a grizzled man with a thick beard, looked up from behind the counter.
You're not the first to ask about that,
he said, his tone somewhat between amused and wary.
But let me tell you, I've been living in these woods for 50 years, and I've never seen anything that couldn't be accounted for.
The owner's words didn't deter Mark. Come on, Dave, he said, nudging his friend. It'll be a great story to tell back home. Dave rolled his eyes, but curiosity won out. Okay, fine, but we'll keep our eyes peeled for Bigfoot. But if we're going to be chasing tall tales, we're going to need more supplies. They bought their essentials, the mood light and playful as they loaded their gear into the car. The drive to the campground was scenic, with the winding road cutting through the dense forest and occasional glimpses of a mountain range in the distance. The setting sun painted the sky with a warm golden hue, casting long shadows over the quiet, untouched landscape. Once they arrived and set up camp, the fire crackled to life, sending a plume of smoke into the air. Mark threw a stick into the flames, watching it burn with a childlike fascination. So, where do these legendary beasts supposedly roam? Dave shrugged, poking the fire with a stick. Probably in the deep woods, somewhere we won't be wandering tonight. Their laughter echoed through the trees, but it was the sudden stillness that followed that sent a chill down Mark's spine. It was as if the forest itself was listening to their conversation. They exchanged a nervous glance before Dave shrugged it off and handed him a beer. The night grew cold, and the whispers of the wind through the trees lulled them into a sense of security. As the fire burned lower, the shadows grew longer, and the sounds of the woods grew more pronounced. An owl hooted in the distance, and the rustle of leaves grew from a gentle lullaby to a cacophony of whispers. The friends' laughter faded as they grew lost in thought, the legend of Bigfoot weaving its way into the fabric of their camping trip. Little did they know, their light-hearted banter was about to take a dark and unexpected turn. As they settled into their tent, the night grew eerily quiet. Mark couldn't shake the feeling of being watched.
You don't really believe in that stuff, do you?
He said, his voice a whisper.
Nah,
Dave replied, though his hands strayed to the zipper, ensuring it was firmly shut.
It's just a bunch of locals trying to scare tourists. You know how it is.
But his voice lacked the usual confidence, hinting at a flicker of doubt. Sleep eluded Mark as he laid in the darkness, the noises of the night amplified by his racing thoughts. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves seemed like the approach of a mythical creature. He tried to ignore it, focusing instead on the comforting rhythm of Dave's steady breathing. Hours later, the first light of dawn began to seep through the tent. The air was heavy with the scent of damp earth and pine. Mark sat up with a jolt, his heart racing. He had heard it again, a thumping sound, like something large moving through the underbrush. He nudged Dave, who groaned and sat up, blinking the sleep from his eyes.
What is it?
He murmured, his voice thick with sleep.
I think I heard something,
Mark said, his voice hushed. The two men listened, their breaths held. The thumping grew louder, closer, and suddenly, the unmistakable shadow of a large creature loomed over their tent. The fabric quivered with the weight of something pressing against it from outside. Their laughter from the night before felt like a distant memory, replaced by a paralyzing fear. Dave's hand found the flashlight, fumbling with shaking fingers until it clicked on. The beam pierced the dark, illuminating a massive fur-covered hand gripping the outside of the tent. They stared in disbelief at the sight before them. It was no legend. Bigfoot was real, and it was hungry. The creature's eyes reflected the light, two shiny orbs filled with an animalistic intelligence. It sniffed the air, and a low guttural growl rumbled from its throat. The tent fabric strained against its powerful grip. Mark's heart hammered in his chest, and he swallowed hard against the bile rising in his throat. The two friends exchanged a terrified look. They had to get out of there, now. Dave grabbed his sleeping bag, yanked it over his head as he scrambled for the tent flap.
Stay low and run for the car,
he whispered urgently. They bursted from the tent, the chilly morning air hitting them like a slap in the face. The creature's growl grew louder as it realized its meal was attempting to escape. They stumbled over rocks and branches, their breaths ragged as they sprinted through the underbrush. The car seemed an eternity away, the thumping of Bigfoot's footsteps closing the distance between them. They reached the car, fumbling with the keys, their hands slippery with fear. The engine roared to life, and they peeled out of the campsite, the tires kicking up gravel and dirt. They didn't dare look back until they were miles away, the campground a distant memory. As they drove, the reality of what they had seen began to sink in.
What do we do?
Mark asked, his voice shaking.
We can't just tell people we saw Bigfoot and it tried to eat us.
Dave gripped the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles white.
We'll tell the ranger,
he said, his voice firm.
They need to know what's out there. Maybe those missing campers weren't just lost.
The drive to the ranger station was a blur, the adrenaline keeping them both sharply focused on the road ahead. When they arrived, they spilled out of the car, recounting their harrowing tale to the skeptical ranger. His expression grew curious as they described the creature's size and the way it had stalked their camp. The ranger listened intently, scribbling notes on a pad.
"I'll send a team out to investigate," he said gravely. "But for now, it's best to keep this between us."
They nodded, the weight of what they had seen heavy on their shoulders. As they drove away from the station, they couldn't shake the feeling that their lives had been forever changed by the encounter with the creature in the woods. And with every shadow that flitted by the car window, they wondered if Bigfoot was still out there, watching them, waiting for the next unwary campers to stumble into its path. The memory was as clear as the crisp mountain air, the smell of pine needles crunching underfoot, the sound of laughter echoing through the trees. It was the summer of '95, and the five of them had stumbled upon the perfect spot. High school had just ended, and the world felt ripe with promise. They had spent weeks planning the hike in Northeast Oregon, a place where the wilderness stretched for miles, untouched by the outside world. The day was a blur of sun-kissed skin and the sweat-soaked t-shirts, the kind of day that made you feel alive. Jenny remembered the moment she first saw the waterfall, a silver ribbon cascading over the rocks into a deep, inviting pool. The cool spray had kissed their faces, and the mist had clung to their eyelashes like nature's own brand of glitter. They had all decided to take a dip, stripping down to their underwear without a second thought. The water was cold, but it was a good kind of cold, the kind that made your heart race and your senses come alive. Her best friend Mark had been the first in. He had whooped as he cannonballed into the deep end, sending ripples out in all directions. His grin had been wide and infectious, just like it had always was. Jenny had followed, the shock of the water making her gasp as it enveloped her. When they surfaced, they had shared a laugh that seemed to echo through the canyon. The others had followed, and for a while, they just floated there, letting the current gently tug at their limbs, feeling free and untethered from the world. After a while, they had laid there on their towels on the warm rocks, letting the sun dry their skin as they shared snacks and stories. They talked about their futures, about college and jobs and the places they'd go. There was an ease to their conversation, a camaraderie forged by years of shared experiences. They were young and invincible, or so they thought. Little did Jenny know, that was the last time she'd see Mark smile, the last time she'd hear the carefree laughter of her friends. Little did she know, the horrors that lurked in the very wilderness that brought them so much joy would soon claim them all, except for her. It began with strange sounds, faint whispers on the wind that grew louder as nightfall approached. They shrugged it off at first, attributing it to their overactive imaginations or maybe a coyote in the distance. But as darkness wrapped around them like a thick blanket, the sounds grew closer, more menacing. They huddled around the campfire, the flickering flames casting eerie shadows on their faces. Mark tried to make light of the situation, cracking jokes that only made them feel slightly less on edge. But the tension was palpable, the kind that made the hair on the back of your neck stand up. The first attack came without warning. One moment they were laughing, the next, Mark was gone, his screams cut short by something unseen. Panic set in, a wild, unbridled terror that made them scramble for their flashlights and stumble over their own feet. They found him some feet away, his body torn and bloodied, eyes wide with fear and shock. They had never seen anything like it. Whatever had killed Mark was powerful, fast, and unseen. They were trapped in a nightmare, and there was no way out. The creature took them one by one, leaving only Jenny to fend for herself. She had never been much of an athlete, but she ran like her life depended on it, which it did. The blood trails grew colder with every passing minute, but she didn't dare slow down. She could feel the creature's presence, a malevolent force that seemed to be toying with her, enjoying her fear. The moon cast a cold light on the ground, illuminating the grisly evidence of her friends' fates. Each mutilated corpse she had stumbled upon was a grim reminder that she was next. Her breath came in ragged gasps, her heart pounding in her chest like a drum, but she didn't dare stop. Not until she reached the safety of civilization. Not until she could warn the others about something fiery lurking in the shadows of those beautiful, treacherous woods. The night stretched on like a never-ending hallway of terror. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of a leaf made her jump. She stumbled through the underbrush, her eyes darting back and forth, searching for any sign of the creature that had taken her friends. But it remained elusive, a specter in the night that haunted her steps. By the time the first rays of dawn began to break through the canopy, Jenny was a mess of scratches and bruises, her clothing torn and stains with dirt and sweat. The horror of what she had seen was etched into her very soul, a darkness that no amount of sunlight could ever erase. And as she emerged from the forest, she knew that she'd never be the same. Northeast Oregon had claimed her innocence and left her with a story she would never forget, a story of the night she had survived and the friends that didn't. The small town was eerily quiet when she stumbled into it, her screams for help hoarse with overuse. The local sheriff found her, barely coherent, babbling about monsters and blood. They searched the woods but found nothing. No tracks, no evidence of a struggle, just the chilling silence that had accompanied her through the night. The townsfolk whispered about bears, maybe a cougar, but Jenny knew the truth. It was something else, something far more terrifying. Something that didn't belong in this world. But no one believed her. They offered her condolences and patted her on the back, but their eyes held a flicker of doubt, a question that lingered in the air like a bad smell. Years passed, and the story grew into a local legend. A campfire tale told to scare children into behaving. Jenny tried to move on, to build a life away from the shadow of that night. But the whispers followed her, the unspoken accusations that maybe she had just snapped, that she had killed her friends herself in some twisted ritual. She tried to convince herself that it was all in her head, that the creature didn't exist. But every time she closed her eyes, she saw the gleaming fangs, the glowing eyes that had haunted her dreams. She knew the truth, even if no one else did, and she vowed that one day she'd prove it. The first real lead came a decade later, a hiker's journal found in the same woods, detailing a similar encounter. The handwriting was frantic. The entries grew shorter and more erratic as the days went on. The last page was smeared with something that looked suspiciously like blood. It was enough to convince her that she wasn't crazy, that the creature was out there, waiting for its next meal. She gathered a team of experts, hunters and trackers who had heard the stories and were willing to risk it all for the thrill of the hunt. They ventured back into that same wilderness, armed with state-of-the-art gear and a burning desire to uncover the truth. The search was grueling. The days blurred into a montage of endless trees and the ever-present thirst for answers. They found signs of the creature's existence, yes, but it remained elusive, always one step ahead. It was as if the woods themselves were protecting it, hiding its tracks and silencing its calls. But Jenny was relentless. She had come too far to give up now. And she knew that somewhere out there, it was watching her, waiting for the moment she'd let her guard down. The anticipation was maddening, a constant dance of fear and determination that fueled her every step. Little did she know, she was about to come face to face with the creature that had stolen her past, the creature that would soon determine her future. The encounter came on the 12th day of their expedition. They made camp near a small stream, the gentle lull of the water providing a false sense of peace. As night descended, they sat around the fire, sharing their theories and listening to any hint of the creature's approach. The air was thick with tension, the flames casting jittery shadows on their faces. And then, without warning, the silence was shattered by an unearthly howl that seemed to come from every direction at once. It was a sound that sent chills down their spines, a sound that spoke of ancient hunger and primal rage. The creature was there. They scrambled for their weapons, their hearts racing like wild horses. The creature emerged from the shadows, its fur mottled and wet with the scent of the forest. It was massive, a hulking beast with eyes that glowed like embers in the dark. The team fired off rounds of ammo, but the creature was fast, dodging bullets with an agility that defied its size. It was as if the very earth itself shifted to accommodate its movements, as if it were a part of the woods come to life. Jenna's heart was in her throat as she watched her friends fall one by one to the creature's powerful jaws. The fear was overwhelming, but so was the anger that boiled within her. With a scream that echoed the creature's own, Jenny charged, her survival instincts taking over. She knew that if she didn't act now, she'd be next. The beast turned its attention to her, its eyes locking onto hers with a predatory focus. Time slowed to a crawl as they faced off, two survivals in a battle that had been waging ever since the dawn of time. She felt the heat of its breath on her skin, smelled the coppery tang of its hunger. But she wasn't the same girl who had ran scared through these woods all those years ago. No, she was a woman hardened by grief and fueled by vengeance. She had a plan. Using the distraction of the gunfire, she managed to arm herself with a makeshift spear, the tip sharpened to a fine point. As the creature lunged, she step-sided with a grace that even surprised her, driving the spear deep into its side. It roared in pain, a sound that seemed to shake the very foundation of the earth. But it wasn't enough to kill it. It was only enough to enrage it further. The creature swiped at her, and she felt the wind from its massive paw as it barely missed her. She knew that she had one chance, one opportunity to end this nightmare. She took a deep breath, whispering the names of her fallen friends as a simple prayer for strength, and prepared for what she knew would be the fight of her life. Jenny had studied the creature's movements, learning from its earlier attacks. It was fast, but it had a pattern. It was a creature of instinct, not of strategy. She waited for a moment, her eyes locking onto its fiery gaze. And then, as it lunged again, she ducked and rolled, coming up from behind it. With all her might, she yanked the spear free and plunged it deep within the base of the creature's skull. There was a sickening crunch, and the beast went down, a mountain of fur and teeth. The woods grew still. The only sound, the labored breathing of the survivors and the slow drip of blood onto the leaves. They waited, tense and trembling, for any sign that it was still alive. But there was nothing. The creature laid lifeless, its eyes now lull and unseen. The victory was bitter, tainted by the loss of her friends and the horror she had endured. But it was a victory nonetheless. They took photos, gathered evidence, and made their way back to civilization, the weight of their discovery heavy on their shoulders. They had proven the creature's existence, but at what cost? The story of their encounter went viral, and soon the quiet town was overrun with tourists seeking a glimpse of the fabled beast. Jenny tried to find solace in the knowledge that she had brought some closure to the families of her friends, but it was a hollow comfort. She knew that the creature wasn't the only one to blame for that night. There was something else in those woods, something that had been watching, something that had been perhaps even called the creature to them. And as the whispers grew quieter, she couldn't shake the feeling that it was still out there, waiting for the next group of unsuspecting hikers to wander into its domain. The nightmare wasn't over. It had only just begun.
You're really going alone? Mark's voice held a hint of skepticism as he peered into Mike's packed car.
Yeah, buddy.
Need some time to think, Mike replied with a shrug, slamming the trunk shut, and flashed a reassuring smile. The early morning air was cool and crisp as Mike pulled away from the curb. He was headed to the dense forests of Washington, a place that held more mystery than his hometown could ever dream of. The solo camping trip was his attempt to escape the relentless humdrum of city life and reconnect with nature. He had packed his car meticulously, ensuring he had all the gear he had needed for a week in the wilderness. Once Mike arrived at his destination, he found a suitable spot to set up camp. The forest floor was a patchwork of ferns and moss, with towering pine trees standing as silent sentinels around him. As he unfurled his tent and hammered into the stakes, he couldn't help but feel a sense of excitement mingling with a touch of unease. He had heard the whispers and local legends and tales of elusive Bigfoots that supposedly roamed these woods. He shrugged off the thought, attributing it to the overactive imagination that often accompanied solitude. It was while he was gathering firewood that he stumbled upon the journal. It was a worn, leather-bound book, hidden under a fallen branch, its pages yellow with age. Curiosity piqued, Mike carried it back to camp. The handwriting was almost illegible, but he managed to make out the words Bigfoot and cursed. The campfire crackled to life as he sat down to read, the flickering flames casting dancing shadows across the pages. The journal spoke of strange occurrences, of hikers who had heard eerie calls in the night and stumbled upon massive footprints where none should be. Mike's heart began to race as he read on. The author claimed to have witnessed the creature firsthand, describing it as a massive bipedal creature with the fur the color of the night. The more Mike read, the more he felt the solitude of the woods closing in around him, turning this peaceful retreat into a heart-pounding quest for the truth. That night, as he laid in his tent, the sounds of the forest grew eerily quiet. Above him, the canopy of leaves talked of secrets in the breeze. Then, from the shadows at the edge of his campfire's light, a twig snapped. Mike sat up with a start, his heart hammering in his chest. He peered into the darkness, his eyes straining to see beyond the flickering shadows. Nothing moved. He told himself it was just an animal, probably a deer or a bear, but the feeling of being watched remained. The next day, Mike decided to explore deeper into the woods, driven by a strange compulsion to find out if the legend was true. He had marked the spot where he had found the journal, and now he wanted to see if he could find any evidence of the creature's existence. He packed a small bag with essentials and set off, the sun casting dappled patterns on the forest floor beneath his hiking boots. As the day wore on, the air grew thick with the tension. Mike noticed that the birds had gone silent, and the underbrush rustled more frequently than usual. Twice, he caught glimpses of something large moving just beyond the tree line, but every time he turned to look, it was gone. The hairs on the back of his neck stood on end, and he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being followed. The sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of pink and orange. Mike realized with a jolt that he had been walking for hours and had gone off trail. Panic began to set in as he looked around, trying to recognize any landmarks. But the forest had become a maze of identical trees and underbrush. He was lost. As darkness closed in, so did the presence that had been shadowing him all day. He heard the unmistakable sound of heavy footsteps, the crack of branches that no bear would make. His heart thudded in his chest like a drum, and he quickened his pace, trying to outrun the unknown. The footsteps grew louder, closer, and Mike knew he had to find shelter. He stumbled upon a large, hollowed-out tree and dove inside, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The forest held its breath as Mike waited, his eyes wide with terror. The footsteps grew louder, until they seemed to be right beside him. He could feel the ground tremble beneath the creature's immense weight. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the presence was gone. The forest returned to its quiet solitude, leaving Mike alone with his racing thoughts in the fading light. He knew that his camping trip had just taken an unexpected and potentially dangerous turn. Mike sat in the tree, his heart thudding in his chest like a wild animal's. He had to find his way back to camp, but the thought of facing that creature again was almost too much to bear. With trembling hands, he pulled out his map and compass, trying to make sense of the unfamiliar terrain. The sun had almost disappeared, leaving him with only the light of the moon to guide his way. As he stepped out of the tree, a strange howl echoed through the night, sending shivers down his spine. It was unlike any animal sound he had ever heard, a mournful wail that seemed to carry with it the weight of 1,000 untold secrets. He took a deep breath and forced himself to start walking, retracing his steps as best as he could. The path grew treacherous in the moonlight, roots and rocks threatening to trip him at every turn. But Mike pressed on, driven by the need to return to the safety of his tent. The howl came again, closer this time, and he broke into a run, his breath coming in harsh pants. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the trees. It was massive, easily twice the size of a man, covered in dark fur that blended with the shadows. Its eyes gleamed like embers in the night, and its powerful form was unmistakable. Bigfoot. Mike froze, his mind racing. He had come looking for an adventure, but now he was face to face with the very creature he had doubted. The creature took a step closer, and Mike could see the curiosity in its gaze. It didn't seem hostile, but he knew better than to underestimate the power of the wild. With a trembling hand, he reached into his pocket and pulled out his camera. The cool metal felt reassuring against his sweaty palm. He took a deep breath and slowly raised it, hoping that the flash wouldn't scare the creature away. But deep down, he was wishing that it would. As he did, the Bigfoot tilted its head slightly, watching him with what Mike could almost swear was a hint of understanding. He snapped a photo, the flash momentarily lighting up the clearing. The creature didn't flinch but held its ground, studying Mike with those fiery eyes. It was a rare, intimate moment, one that could change the course of his life if he could only make it back to civilization with proof. The creature took another step closer, and Mike felt his heart racing even faster. He could see the intricate details of its fur, the muscles rippling beneath the surface. It was both terrifying and memorizing, all at the same time. He took a few more photos, each one capturing a different angle, a different emotion in those ancient eyes. The Bigfoot reached out a hand, and for a moment, Mike thought it might be reaching for him. Instead, it gently touched the camera, its massive fingers wrapping around the device with surprising delicacy. It held it up, examining it with the curiosity before letting it fall to the ground. Mike realized that he had been holding his breath and exhaled slowly. The creature stepped back, and the tension in the air dissipated. It turned away and disappeared into the trees, leaving Mike alone once more with his thoughts and the echo of the camera's shutter in his ears. With shaking legs, Mike picked up his camera and made his way back to camp, his mind racing with questions. What had just happened? Was the creature more intelligent than anyone would have given it credit for? And what would the world make of these photos? The trip had taken a turn that he could never have anticipated, and he had stumbled in. And as he stumbled into his tent, exhausted and overwhelmed, Mike knew that this encounter would haunt his dreams for the rest of his life. But he also knew that he had been granted a gift, a glimpse into a world that most people would never see. And with that gift came a responsibility, a burden to share the truth of what is out there, lurking in the woods of the forest in Washington. As he laid down to sleep, the wind of the trees seemed to hold secrets of their own, secrets that Mike was now a part of. And somewhere in the distance, the mournful howl of the Bigfoot echoed once more, a reminder that he was not alone in this vast, uncharted wilderness. The moon had barely crested the tree line when I set up camp. I was in Idaho, the land of rugged beauty, surrounded by nothing but the quiet whispers of the forest and the distant howl of a lonely wolf. It was a clear night, with stars scattered across the sky like glitter on black velvet. I'd come here for peace and solitude, hoping to find myself in the wilderness. Firewood crackled as I stoked the fire, sending sparks into the dark abyss above. The smell of roasting marshmallows filled the air, mingling with the scent of pine needles and campfire smoke. The sweetness was a comforting contrast to the earthiness beneath my feet. I sat cross-legged, poking at the embers with a stick, lost in thought. The warmth from the fire was a gentle caress against the chill that had begun to settle into my bones. My eyes grew heavy as the night grew deeper, and the whispers of the trees grew more insistent. I laid back on my sleeping bag, my eyes tracing the path of the stars. They twinkled like 1,000 distant fires, each one a story waiting to be told. I let out a contented sigh and closed my eyes, the rhythmic rustling of leaves lulling me into a doze. But the peace was shattered by a sudden snap of a twig, closer than it should have been. My eyes flew open,
and my heart pounded in my chest. I sat up, straining my ears to pick out the source of the sound. The forest was eerily still, the usual symphony of the night critters silenced. A chill that had nothing to do with the temperature ran down my spine. Something was watching me, something that didn't belong. In the periphery of the fire's flickering glow, I saw it. A towering silhouette with elongated limbs that seemed to stretch into the very fabric of the shadows. Its eyes, two piercing orbs of yellow, gleamed with an unearthly light. The creature was hairless, with skin so pale it was almost translucent, and it stood at least 8 feet tall. My breath caught in my throat as it took a deliberate step closer, the underbrush crunching beneath its heavy tread. I fumbled for my flashlight, the only defense I had brought with me. The creature's eyes remained locked on the mine as I switched it on, the beam of light illuminating a grotesque face, a twisted mockery of human features. The sight was almost too much to bear, and for a moment, I thought I might pass out from fear. But I held firm, my hand shaking as I pointed the light directly at the creature, willing it to reveal itself fully. The creature took another step closer, and the light danced across its skin, revealing a network of veins that pulsed with an unnatural rhythm. Its eyes never left mine, and I could feel them boring into me, probing my very soul. The air grew colder, and the hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. It was as if the creature was daring me to look away, to acknowledge my fear and give it power over me. But I wouldn't. I couldn't. My hand trembled as I reached for the canister of bear spray attached to my belt. I knew deep down that this wasn't a bear, but I hoped that the scent and spray would deter it regardless. I took a deep breath and held it, preparing for what I knew was coming. The creature took one final step, its long, bony fingers reaching out towards me, the tips of its claws glinting in the firelight. The moment stretched out like a tightrope between two skyscrapers. I squeezed the trigger, and a stream of chemicals shot out, enveloping the creature in a cloud of mist. It let out a high-pitched screech that pierced the quiet of the night and sent a shiver down my back. The yellow eyes grew wider, and for a moment I thought I had made a terrible mistake. But then it stumbled back, its form dissipating into the darkness from which it came. The sound of its retreat grew fainter until it was nothing but a memory, leaving me alone once more with the crackling fire and the whispers of the forest. The night felt heavier now, the shadows deeper and more menacing. I knew that I couldn't stay here, not with that creature out there. I packed my things as quickly and quietly as I could, throwing them in my backpack without bothering to organize them. I had to get out, had to find town before it came back. As I stumbled through the woods, my flashlight beam cutting a jittery path through the darkness, I couldn't shake the feeling of still being watched. Every snap of a twig or hoot of an owl had me spinning around, expecting to see those glowing eyes again. My breath came in ragged gasps, and my heart hammered in my ears like a drum. The moon had moved across the sky, casting strange elongated shadows that twisted and danced with every step I took. I pushed myself faster, my legs burning with the effort, the adrenaline coursing through my veins like liquid fire. I had to keep moving, had to put as much distance as possible between me and whatever that thing was. Finally, as the first hints of dawn began to seep through the canopy of leaves above, I saw it. The glimmer of light on metal. A hiker's trail sign, beckoning me back to the safety of the known world. I broke into a run, my boots thumping against the hard-packed dirt. The fear propelled me forward, pushing me past the point of exhaustion until I staggered out of the trees and onto the trail. My breath came in great heavy gasps as I collapsed onto the ground, my chest heaving. The sun was rising, casting a warm glow over the landscape and chasing the shadows away. I looked around, but there was no sign of the creature. It was as if it had been a figment of my overactive imagination, a nightmare conjured by the whispers of the forest. And then I heard footsteps, human footsteps, approaching from the direction on the trail. I scrambled to my feet, fumbling with the bear spray, ready to face whatever new terror the night had in store for me. A figure emerged from the trees, and relief washed over me when I saw the green hat and badge of a park ranger. The ranger, a grizzly man with a thick beard and concerned eyes, took in the sight of my disheveled appearance and paled visage.
You okay there, son?
He asked, his voice gruff but kind. I nodded, trying to regain my composure, and recounted the events of the night, the words spilling out in a jumbled rush. He listened intently, stroking his chin as the story grew more and more fantastical. When I finished, he studied me for a long moment before speaking.
You wouldn't be the first to tell me a tale like this around here, he said slowly. These woods have a way of playing tricks on the mind, especially at night.
He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a whisper.
But I've heard stories too. Legends, really, about a creature we call the Moon-Touched Ones. They're said to wander the wilderness, drawn by the light of the full moon, tall, hairless, with the eyes that glow like lanterns in the dark.
He paused, his gaze flickering in the horizon where the moon still hung low.
Some say they're ancient beings, cursed to roam the earth in the form of monsters. Others reckon they're just figments out of our fears, brought to life by the power of belief.
He handed me a flask of water, and I took a grateful sip, feeling the cool liquid soothe my parched throat.
Whatever it is, he continued, it's best that you be on your guard around here. People have gone missing, and when they come back, if they come back, they're not always right.
The ranger's words echoed in my mind as I followed him back to civilization, the memory of the creature's eyes burning into my mind's eye. Was it real? Or had I simply succumbed to the whispers of the forest, the rumors, the fears that the forest unleashed? Either way, one thing was clear. I would never look at the wilderness the same way again. The beauty of Idaho was now tainted with the hint of the macabre, and every shadow held the potential for a new horror to unfold. As we approached the ranger station, I couldn't shake the feeling of still being watched. Might have just been my paranoia. I glanced over my shoulder, but there was nothing there. Nothing but the trees, standing tall and silent, as if keeping a secret only they knew. The ranger dropped me off at a local diner where I sat nursing a cup of hot coffee, trying to convince myself that what I had seen was a figment of my imagination, a trick of the light and my own fear. But deep down, I knew the truth. The Idaho wilderness had shown me a side of itself that most never saw, and I had lived to tell the tale. John MacDonald had the kind of eyes that made people feel like they could trust him. Warm and inviting, they crinkled at the edges when he talked about his love for the outdoors. His skin was tanned and rough from countless hours spent in the sun, and his calloused hands told tales of adventures in the wilderness that most only read about in books. But tonight, those same eyes held a flicker of uncertainty as he packed up his gear for his latest solo camping trip. John was a creature of habit, meticulously checking and rechecking his list of supplies. He had chosen a spot in the heart of the Michigan woods, a place where the trees grew tall and thick, and the stars looked like they were painted onto the sky. The campground area was known for its peace and quiet, a stark contrast to his usual hectic life. He hoped the isolation would help him untangle the knots in his thoughts, to find some clarity amidst the chaos of his recent breakup and job troubles. As he drove deeper into the woods, the noise of the city gradually faded away. The car radio switched the static, and he rolled down the window to let in the cool evening air. It smelled faintly of pine and something wild, something that made him feel alive. He pulled into his designated spot and stepped out, stretching his legs. The silence was deafening, broken only by the distant hoot of an owl. He took in a deep breath and started setting up camp. The sun dipped below the horizon, leaving a smear of pink and orange across the sky. John built a small fire and sat down to eat his dinner of beans and franks. He listened to the crackling of the fire and the rustling of the leaves above him, feeling the weight of the world lift off of his shoulders. He had brought along a book, a biography of some forgotten explorer, but found himself too engrossed in the sounds of nature to read. Suddenly, a twig snapped, and the hairs on the back of his neck stood on end. John looked around, but all he could see was the flicker of firelight playing on the surrounding trees. He told himself it was probably just a deer, maybe even a raccoon foraging for food. But as he peered into the brush, his heart skipped a beat. A pair of yellow eyes, eerily bright in the darkness, stared back at him from the shadows. They belonged to something much larger and more terrifying than any creature he had ever encountered. The creature emerged slowly, its fur coat blending almost perfectly with the night. It was tall, easily reaching over 7 feet, with a muscular frame that spoke of raw power. John's hand trembled as he reached for his flashlight, his eyes transfixed on the creature's unblinking gaze. This dogman stepped into the clearing, revealing a human-like form, but with an undeniable feral intensity. Its eyes remained locked on him, a silent challenge that sent a cold shiver down his spine. John's mind raced, trying to reconcile what he was seeing with what he knew to be possible. He had heard about the stories about these creatures, but they were just that, stories. Yet here it was, standing before him in all its terrifying glory. He fumbled with his flashlight, finally turning it on and pointing it at the creature. The beam of light illuminated its snarling muzzle, exposing the sharp teeth and elongated snout. Its fur was mottled and wet-looking, as if it had just emerged from a swamp. The creature took a step closer, and John's fear turned to primal instinct. He knew that he had to protect himself. He had grabbed a nearby stick, his hand gripping it tightly as the dogman creature took another step forward. The fire crackled and popped, casting an eerie glow across the campsite. John could feel the creature's breath, hot and foul, on his face. He took a step back, his legs shaking. The dogman tilted its head slightly, almost curiously, before letting out a low growl that seemed to vibrate through John's very bones. John knew that he had to do something, and fast. He threw the stick into the fire, sending a shower of sparks into the night. It spooked the creature, recoiling slightly, giving him enough space to grab his backpack and dart into the trees. He didn't look back, his breath coming in ragged gasps as he stumbled through the underbrush. He could hear the creature's footsteps following him, heavy and deliberate. His heart pounded in his chest like a drum, each beat a reminder of the danger closing in. He didn't know if he could outrun it, didn't know if he could survive this night, but he knew that he had to try. The sound of the creature grew louder, and John could feel it gaining on him. He pushed himself harder, his legs burning with the effort, the branches slapping on his face. He broke through the tree line and into the parking lot, the sight of his car a beacon of hope. He fumbled with the keys, dropping them once, twice, before finally getting the door open. He jumped in and slammed it shut, the sound echoing through the quiet night. The dogman was only a few feet away, its yellow eyes glowing like twin suns. John started the engine, the roar of the engine seeming to startle the creature for a moment. He threw the car into reverse and stepped on the gas, the tires screeching as he tore out of the lot. He didn't look back, not even in the rearview mirror. He could feel the creature's eyes still on him, boring into the back of his head like a pair of hot knives. The road ahead was a blur of darkness as he sped away, his heart racing in his chest. The drive was a blur of adrenaline and fear. He didn't know where he was going, only that he had to get as far away from that place as possible. His gear laid abandoned, a silent witness to the terror he had faced. The image of the dogman's snarling face was burned into his retinas, and every shadow on the road looked like it was reaching out to grab him. The quiet of the night was shattered by his panting breaths and the frantic beating of his heart. As he drove, John's mind reeled. What was that thing? Was it real, or just a figment of his stressed-out imagination? The stories had always just been stories. But the fear was all too real, a cold knot in his stomach that wouldn't go away. He knew that he had to tell someone, had to warn them about what he had just seen. But who would believe him? His friends would think he was nuts or pulling a prank. The authorities would think he was just a prankster. Still, he had to do something. He had to make sure that no one else faced what he had that night. The headlights cut through the darkness, revealing the winding road that stretched out before him. John's eyes never left the road, his mind racing with thoughts of what he would say, who he could trust. He had always loved the solace of the wilderness, but tonight, it had shown him a side of itself that was anything but peaceful. And as he drove away from the woods, leaving the creature behind, he couldn't help but feel that he had also been leaving a piece of himself behind. The night had changed him in ways he hadn't anticipated, and he knew that he would never be the same again. The legend of the Dogman of Michigan had just become his reality, and he wasn't sure he was ready for what that meant. Well, I hope that you guys enjoyed the 3 terrifying stories tonight. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe if you're new. Also, check me out on Apple Podcast and Spotify. Tales from the Dark Forest. Have a good night. I never liked camping. I don't know why I agreed to do it. Maybe it was peer pressure, or maybe I just didn't want to seem like the odd one out. It was supposed to be harmless fun, a weekend in the woods, just me and 4 of my closest friends, Ryan, Gabe, Lisa, and Chloe. We had packed up our tents, snacks, and enough firewood to last us 3 days. It felt like the kind of adventure you would look back on and laugh about years later. The hike to the campsite was longer than I expected. The forest was dense, the kind of place where the canopy swallows the sunlight, leaving everything beneath in a perpetual twilight. The air smelled like damp moss and rotting wood. It was beautiful in a way, but it felt oppressive, like the trees were leaning in, listening. As we trudged along, something nagged at the back of my mind. I couldn't shake the feeling that we had passed the same tree before. Its trunk was split low to the ground, forming a jagged Y shape. It's just your imagination, I muttered to myself. But when I glanced over my shoulder, the Y tree was there again. It felt like it was following us, though no one else seemed to notice. "Are we almost there?" I asked, my voice breaking the silence. My question was met with groans from Ryan and Chloe, but Lisa didn't say anything. She was walking ahead, her pace slower now, her head turning every few steps to glance over her shoulder. When we reached the clearing, I paused. Something about it felt wrong. Not dangerous, just wrong. The fire pit was already there, a perfect circle of stones that didn't look weathered or old, like someone had just built it. Even the trees around the clearing were too perfect, spaced in an almost mathematical pattern, their trunks leaning slightly inward. "Convenient," Chloe joked, but her laugh sounded forced. I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't the first ones here, not by a long shot. As we set up our tents, I caught Lisa staring into the woods again. Her hands were trembling slightly as she unfolded her tent. "You okay?" I asked. She nodded, but her eyes didn't meet mine. "Yeah, I don't like how quiet it is." Night came fast. Too fast. One moment the sky was streaking with red and orange. The next, it was black as ink. It wasn't like the sun had set. It was like someone had flipped a switch. The fire crackled and popped, throwing shadows that danced on the surrounding trees. The clearing felt smaller now, the trees pressing in closer than they had before. I glanced at Lisa. She wasn't laughing like the others. Her gaze was fixed on the fire pit, her fingers tracing invisible shapes in the dirt. "Lisa?" I asked quietly. She startled, wiping the dirt with her palm and looking up at me with wide eyes. "You okay?" "Fine," she said quickly. Too quickly. But when the whistle came again, her head snapped towards the woods. She stared, unblinking, her lips moving slightly, though no sound came out. "Did you hear that?" I asked, my heart racing. "Don't," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Don't look for it." Her words sent a shiver down my spine, but before I could press her, Ryan groaned loudly.
Dude, it's just the wind.
I wasn't so sure. The whistle wasn't random. It was deliberate, almost like it was calling.
No, seriously,
I said. It sounded like someone whistling. Gabe groaned. "Don't start with that creepy shit. You're just trying to freak us out." But I wasn't. I knew what I had heard. The others dismissed it, but the sound came again. Louder this time. Clearer. A long, deliberate whistle, like someone calling a dog. It echoed through the trees, too sharp, too human. "Probably just some hiker," Chloe said, but her voice wavered. "Hikers don't whistle like that at night," I whispered. The air felt heavier after that, the laughter and chatter replaced by uneasy silence. We retreated to our tents early, but I couldn't sleep. Every rustle of leaves, every creak of branches made my heart race. And then, just as I was beginning to drift off, I heard it again. The whistle. This time, it was closer. The fire had died down to glowing embers, barely enough to light the clearing. The whistle came again, clearer now. It echoed through the trees, too sharp, too human. I sat up in my tent, my heart pounding, and unzipped the flap. The forest was still, but something was wrong. I noticed it first in the way the clearing felt. Different. The trees seemed closer than they had been earlier, their gnarling branches twisting towards the tents like skeletal hands. The fire pit looked untouched, the stones unnervingly clean, like no fire had burned there at all. I stumbled out, clutching my flashlight. "Ryan? Gabe?" My voice sounded hollow in the silence. Then I saw them. Footprints. Bare, human footprints pressed into the dirt. They led straight from the edge of the clearing straight to the tents, stopping right outside mine. A twig snapped behind me. I whispered, turning slowly. She was standing at the edge of the clearing, her finger barely visible in the dim light. Her face was pale, her lips parted as if she was about to speak, but she said nothing. "What are you doing out here?" I asked, my voice trembling. She tilted her head slightly, her expression unreadable. "It's already too late," she said softly, almost to herself. "It always is." "What?" I stepped towards her, but she turned and disappeared into the shadows. I froze, my breath hitching. That's when I heard the breathing. Slow, deliberate, and just behind me. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. Every instinct in my body screamed to me to move, to run, to do something, but I stayed frozen, paralyzed by the sound of that breathing. It was close, too close, wet and uneven, like whoever it had been was running for miles. The back of my neck prickled, and I swore I could feel the faint warmth of their exhale against my skin. You've felt it before, haven't you? The one that tells you that something's wrong before your brain can catch up. Like when you're walking home alone at night and you feel the weight of eyes on you, hidden in the shadows. You tell yourself it's nothing, just your imagination. But deep down, you know better. That's what this was. Only worse. Because this wasn't my imagination. This was real. I clenched the flashlight tighter, fingers slick with sweat. My voice felt like it had been stolen from my throat, locked away by the growing dread that whatever was behind me wasn't right. My breathing stopped. Just like that, no shuffle of feet, no retreat into the trees. It just ended, like whoever or whatever was there had vanished into thin air. I forced myself to move, my legs shaking as I staggered towards Ryan's tent. My flashlight beam wavered across the clearing, catching the faint glint of something wet on the ground. For a moment, I thought it was dew, but when I crouched down to look closer, I realized it wasn't water. It was blood. The footprints, they were smeared now, trailing crimson streaks back towards the woods. But what stopped me cold wasn't the blood or the tracks. It was the fact that there was more of them now. Not one set of footprints, 3. Bare, misshapen prints that twisted and dragged, like whoever made them wasn't walking on normal feet. I scrambled to Ryan's tent, tearing the zipper open. "Ryan!" I hissed, my flashlight flickering over an empty sleeping bag, crumbled and cold. No sign of him. No sign of Gabe or Lisa or Chloe. I stood there, swallowing the lump in my throat as a silence pressed in, thicker than the darkness itself. That's when I noticed it. My breath hanging in the air, misting in the sudden chill. The temperature had dropped, but it wasn't just cold. It was wrong. The kind of cold that seeped into your bones and made you feel like you didn't belong here, like you shouldn't have come. The whistle came again, louder this time, impossibly close. It was no longer human. It sounded jagged, broken, as if something was mimicking the sound without understanding how it should work. It echoed through the clearing, bouncing off the trees until it felt like it was coming from every direction at once. And then I saw it. The trees at the edge of the clearing were swaying, not with the wind, but with something moving between them. The shadow too large, too tall, stretching unnaturally in the faint light of the dying fire. Its movements were jerky, like a puppet with its strings tangled, but its pace was deliberate, intentional. It stopped just beyond the firelight, and for a moment, I thought it was gone. Until I saw the eyes. They weren't eyes, not really. Just two faint pinpricks of light, like reflections in the back of a predator's gaze. But they didn't blink. They didn't waver. They just stared, unblinking, locked onto me. You know that feeling when you're in a nightmare, and you know you're dreaming, but no matter how hard you try, you just can't wake up? That's what this was. A waking nightmare, one I couldn't escape. The whistle came again, long and slow, and this time it felt like an invitation or a warning. I turned and ran. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The sound of branches snapping and leaves crunching told me enough. It was following me. Every nerve in my body screamed to keep running, but the forest seemed endless, the trees twisting around me like the ribs of some massive dying beast. My flashlight barely cut through the darkness, and the beam flickered with every frantic step. My lungs burned, and my legs felt like they were about to give out when I tripped, sprawling face first into the dirt. The flashlight skittered out of my hand, the bulb finally giving up with a soft pop. I laid there for a moment, gasping for air, too terrified to move. Then I heard it again. The whistle. But it wasn't behind me anymore. It was to my left. "Stop it!" I shouted, my voice cracking. "What do you want?" The forest didn't answer. Of course it didn't. It just loomed around me, silent and suffocating. I scrambled to my feet, my hands trembling as I searched for anything I could use as a weapon. A rock, a branch, anything. That's when I heard the voice. "Nick? Is that you?" It was Lisa. I froze, my heart pounding in my ears. I couldn't see her, but her voice was unmistakable, echoing softly through the trees. Relief and confusion weared into my chest. "Lisa, where are you?" I called out, my voice trembling. A moment later, she emerged from the shadows, her face pale in the moonlight. She was wearing her jacket, but it was torn, and her hair was matted with dirt and leaves. She looked wrong. Her smile was there, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "I've been looking for you," she said, her voice soft, almost too calm given the circumstances. "You ran off and I was worried." "I ran off?" I snapped, my fear making me bolder than I felt. "Everyone was gone. What happened? Where's Ryan, Gabe, and Chloe?" Her smile faltered just for a second. "I don't know. We got separated, but we need to go now. It's not safe here." "No kidding," I muttered, glancing nervously over my shoulder. "There's something out here, Lisa. Something—" "I know," she interrupted, her tone sharper than I expected. "I saw it too. That's why we need to move." Her urgency was convincing, but something about her felt off. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but the way she avoided my gaze, the way her hands fidgeted at her sides, it didn't sit right. Still, what choice did I have? I wasn't going to survive out here alone. "Fine," I said, "but we need to find the others." She hesitated for just a second before nodding. "Of course. Come on. I think I know a way out." She grabbed my arm, her grip surprisingly strong, and pulled me through the trees. She moved quickly, like she knew exactly where she was going, but her path didn't make any sense. It was winding, looping, as if she was leading me in circles. The whistle came again, distant now, but still too close for comfort. "How do you know where we're going?" I asked, trying to keep the panic out of my voice. "I don't," she quickly replied, too quickly. I think there's a road this way." "But we didn't come from this direction," I pointed out. She stopped abruptly, spinning to face me. Her expression was strange, equal parts frustration and fear. "Do you trust me or not?" she demanded, her voice low and urgent. I didn't. Not entirely. But before I could respond, a guttural growl cut through the air, closer than ever. I didn't have time to argue. We ran, the sound of heavy footsteps crashing through the forest behind us. We reached a small clearing, and Lisa pulled me towards a cluster of rocks. "Hide here," she hissed, pushing me down behind one of the larger boulders. "Stay quiet." "What about you?" I whispered, my voice barely audible over the pounding of my heart. "I'll distract it," she said, her expression unreadable. "Just stay here, okay?" And then she was gone, disappearing into the shadows before I could stop her. I crouched behind the rock, every nerve on edge as the growling grew louder. I couldn't see it, but I could feel it. A presence in the dark, watching, waiting. And then I heard something that made my blood run cold. Lisa's voice. But it wasn't calling out to me. It was whistling. Long and low, the same broken tune that had been haunting us all night. I don't know how long I stayed there, frozen in the dark, but I finally worked up the courage to peek out from behind the rock. The forest was empty, quiet, too quiet. And then I saw her, Lisa, standing at the edge of the clearing, staring at me. Her face was blank, her eyes glassy, but her lips were curved into that same unsettling smile. "Come on, Nick," she said, her voice soft, almost sing-song. "It's safe now." But it wasn't her voice. Not really. It was too flat, too hollow, like someone wearing her skin and learned to mimic her words. And behind her, just barely visible in the shadows, were the eyes. Two pinpricks of light glowing faintly as they watched me. I didn't wait. I bolted. I ran until my legs felt like they'd snap, until my breath came in jagged gasps and tore through my throat. But no matter how far I went, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't running away from anything. I was being herded. The trees seemed to close in tighter, the roots clawing at my feet like hands trying to drag me down. And Lisa's whistle. God, that whistle. It never stopped. Long, low, and deliberate, like it was winding through the forest itself, carried on a wind that didn't touch my skin. Sometimes it was close, so close I thought she was right behind me, but when I turned, there was nothing. Other times it was distant, echoing like it came from every direction at once. When I burst through the trees, my stomach dropped. It wasn't just any clearing. It was the clearing, the same one we had set up camp in. The fire pit was smoldering faintly again, the stones arranged in their perfect, unnatural circle. The tents were back, their flaps closed as if no one had touched them. I staggered forward, my breath catching in my throat. "No," I whispered. "This can't be." A chill ran down my spine when I noticed the trees just beyond the clearing. The Y tree. Its jagged trunk loomed like a marker, its presence mocking me. I had been here before. I had never left. The tents were back. All of them. Perfectly pitched, the way they had been before we went to sleep. My stomach twisted. I knew they hadn't been there when I left. I had seen the empty space, but now they stood there like nothing had happened. The flaps closed, their shapes too still in the faint light.
Nick?
A voice called softly, and my blood turned to ice. It was Ryan. His voice was weak, hoarse, coming from one of the tents.
Nick, help me!
My instinct screamed to run, but my legs wouldn't move.
Ryan?
I croaked. Where have you been? No answer. Just the soft, rhythmic rustle of fabric, like something shifting inside the tent.
Nick!
This time, it wasn't Ryan's voice. It was Gabe's, coming from another tent. Then Lisa's. Then Chloe's. One by one, they called out to me, their voices layered over each other, too smooth, too perfect, like they were reading from the same script.
Nick, help us! Nick, we're hurt!
Nick, don't leave us! The flap of Ryan's tent twitched, and something slid out. Not him. Not anything human. It was a hand, or at least it was shaped like one, but the fingers were too long, the skin too pale, almost translucent. It gripped the edge of the fabric, and then another hand joined it, pulling the flap wider. I stepped back, my chest tightening as a shape began to emerge. It was Ryan, or something trying to be Ryan. His face was wrong, stretched in gait, his eyes black pits that seemed to eat the light. His mouth hung open, wider than it should, his jaw creaking like wood under strain.
Nick!
It rasped, its voice still carrying that echo of his, but layered with something else. Something deeper, hungrier. The tent beside his moved, and then the next, and the next. More of them were coming out, each one twisted, misshapen, their forms shifting like shadows trying to hold shape. And behind them, from the dark edges of the clearing, came the sound of Lisa's whistle. Slow, steady, closer. I stumbled back, tripping over the fire pit, and hit the ground hard. My head spun, and for a second, all I could see was the sky above, the stars, faint and distant, twinkling through the gaps in the canopy. And then something moved in my peripheral vision. I turned, my heart hammering in my chest, and froze. There was something standing at the edge of the clearing, taller than the trees, its body impossibly thin, a silhouette that did not belong in this world. Its head was wrong, too narrow, too elongated, and its arms hung like lifeless branches. But its face, oh God, its face. It didn't have one, just a smooth, featureless plane that seemed to ripple and shimmer like water in the moonlight. But I knew it was looking at me. I could feel it. The whistling stopped. The silence that followed was unbearable, pressing down on me like a weight. And then, in a voice that wasn't Lisa's, but somehow still was, it spoke. You shouldn't have come here. The words didn't echo. They didn't even sound like they were spoken aloud. They just were, filling the space around me, inside me, until they became my own thoughts. The creature stepped forward, and the ground seemed to bend beneath it, the earth rippling like a reflection in disturbed water. The things that had crawled out of the tents froze, their heads snapping towards it as if waiting for a command. Run, the voice whispered again, but this time it sounded amused, mocking. I didn't need to be told twice. I bolted into the forest, the sound of my own ragged breathing barely drowning out the rustle of something massive moving behind me. But as I ran, I realized something horrible. The trees weren't where they were supposed to be. They shifted, their trunks sliding in and out of place, the path twisting and looping back on itself like a labyrinth with no way out. Every step felt heavier, slower, like the ground itself was trying to pull me down. And then I heard it. Lisa's whistle. But this time, it wasn't ahead of me. It was inside my head. It came with words now, her voice weaving through my thoughts like a spider spinning a web. "You can't run, Nick. You never could." And then, as the whistle grew louder, I realized something I hadn't before, something that sent a cold wave of dread crashing over me. It didn't want to kill me. It wanted to keep me. I kept running, but it didn't matter. The forest wasn't a forest anymore. It was alive, shifting and twisting, trapping me in its grasp. My legs felt heavier with every step, as though the ground was pulling me down and my lungs burned like fire. Every direction I turned led me back to the same place. Darkness. No clearing, no road, no way out. The whistle was constant now, burrowing into my skull. It wasn't just a sound anymore. It was a presence, something alive, wrapping itself around my thoughts like a parasite. Every step I took, every ragged breath I drew, it was there, mocking me, guiding me. "You shouldn't have come here." Lisa's voice echoed in my mind, but it wasn't just her anymore. It was Ryan's, Gabe's, Chloe's. All of them blending together into something that wasn't human. Their voices overlapped, weaving into a symphony of whispers that drowned out even my own thoughts. I clapped my hands over my ears, but it didn't help. I stumbled to a stop, collapsing against a tree. My legs couldn't carry me anymore. My body was spent. The forest seemed to close in around me, the shadows stretching longer, darker, until they swallowed everything. I looked up, desperate for the sky, for the stars, something, anything to remind me I was still in the real world. But the sky was gone. Above me, there was only blackness. Not the darkness of night, but something deeper, something void. Something alive. And in that void, I saw them, those pinpricks of light, too many to count, scattering like stars but wrong. Too sharp, too aware. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. My throat was raw, my voice stolen by the same forces that had taken everything else. That's when I saw Lisa again. She stepped out from the trees, her movements smooth, deliberate. Her clothing was still torn, her hair still matted with dirt, but her face was different. There was no fear there now, no urgency. Just a calm, unsettling stillness, her eyes empty pools of black that reflected nothing. "You're tired," she said softly, her voice echoing in my mind even though her lips barely moved. "I told you not to run." I tried to back away, but my body wouldn't move. The ground beneath me seemed to shift, pulling me down like quicksand. I clawed at the dirt, but my hands sank deeper with every movement, as though the earth itself had turned against me. "Stop fighting," Lisa whispered. She crouched in front of me, her head tilting at an unnatural angle. "It's easier if you don't fight."
Why?
My voice cracked, barely audible.
Why are you doing this?
Her smile widened, stretching her face in a way that wasn't human. "Because you came here," she said simply, as if that explained everything. "Because you heard the whistle." I shook my head, tears streaming down my face. I didn't know." "None of you ever do." Her voice was almost gentle now, like a mother comforting a child. "But it doesn't matter. You heard it, and now you belong to it."
"What is it?"
I whispered. Her eyes flicked towards the darkness behind her, and for the first time, I saw it clearly. It stepped out of the void, its form shifting, unraveling and reforming with every step. It was too tall, too thin, its limbs too long and angular, its face, even if it had one, smooth and blank. But the worst part was the way it moved. It didn't walk or glide. It folded into existence, like the space around it was bending to its will. "You're part of it now," Lisa said, her voice fading as the thing approached. "We all are." I tried to scream again, but my voice was gone. My mind was unraveling, the whispers growing louder until I couldn't tell where they ended and I began. The thing crouched down, its featureless head tilting as if studying me. I could feel it pressing into my thoughts, peeling back my memories, my fears, everything that made me, me. And then, finally, I understood. There was no escape. There never had been. This wasn't just a forest. It was a trap, a living, breathing thing that fed on people like me. People foolish enough to stray too far, to hear the whistle, to follow it in the dark. I felt my body sinking deeper into the ground, the cold earth swallowing me whole. Lisa knelt beside me, her hand brushing my arm. Her skin was ice, but her touch felt like it belonged to a stranger. "Don't fight it," she murmured again. "Soon you'll forget, and then it won't hurt anymore." I wanted to fight. I wanted to scream. But as the darkness closed around me, I realized I didn't have the strength. The last thing I saw was Lisa's face, her hollow smile etched into my mind like a scar. The last thing I heard was the whistle, soft and haunting, fading as the world dissolved around me. And then, there was nothing. I jolted awake, gasping for air, my body drenched in sweat. My hands clutched at the dirt beneath me, solid and real. For a moment, I couldn't move, my mind still trapped in the suffocating nightmare. My heart pounded in my chest, and I frantically looked around. I was in the clearing. The fire was out, but still smoldering faintly, a thin line of smoke curling into the starry sky. The tents were exactly the way they had been, untouched. The forest was still, save for the occasional rustle of leaves in the faint breeze. It was just a dream. Just a terrible, awful dream. I forced myself to sit up, my breath still coming in ragged gasps. But as I did, I noticed something that made my stomach twist. My hands were trembling, and beneath the dirt caked on my palms, there was something else. Scratches. Deep, jagged scratches, as if I had been clawing at the earth. It wasn't entirely a dream.
"Nick, you okay?"
A voice called softly. I turned to see Ryan emerging from his tent, rubbing his eyes. Behind him, Chloe and Gabe were stirring, their groggy voices breaking the stillness. My words caught in my throat. I wanted to tell them, to scream that something was wrong, that we needed to leave right now. But my stomach felt dry. The words stuck somewhere between my panic and the rational part of my brain that tried to convince myself that it was just a dream. What's wrong? Chloe asked, stepping closer. Her face was etched with concern. You look like you just seen a ghost. I think we're in danger. I finally managed to choke out. My voice sounded foreign to my own ears, shaky and strained. There's something in these woods. Something watching us. Ryan frowned, his half-awake expression quickly turning skeptical. You had a bad dream, man. That's all it was. You're freaking yourself out. No, I snapped, louder than I meant to. The others flinched, and I immediately regretted it, but I couldn't stop. It wasn't just a dream. I heard it. I felt it. There's something out there, and we need to leave now.
Nick,
Gabe said carefully, his voice low, like he was trying not to spook me. It's in the middle of the night. We're miles from anywhere. Let's just wait until morning, okay? If you're still freaked out, we'll pack up and go. Morning? The words sent a chill down my spine. I couldn't explain why, but the thought of staying until dawn felt wrong. Like something terrible would happen if we didn't leave right now. Please, I whispered, my voice cracking. We can't stay here. Nick, Chloe started, but her voice trailed off. Her gaze shifted past me into the forest, and her face went pale. What? I asked, turning to follow her eyes. But there was nothing there. Just the trees, dark and impenetrable. I thought I saw... She shook her head, rubbing her arms as if suddenly cold. Never mind. It's probably just a deer or something, Ryan muttered, but his voice lacked any conviction. I wanted to argue, to grab them and drag them out of the clearing if I had to. But before I could, the whistle came. Faint at first. So faint it was almost indistinguishable from the wind. My stomach dropped.
what the hell is that?
Gabe asked, his face going pale. I told you, I whispered, my voice barely audible over the rising pitch of the whistle. It's here. The others exchanged nervous glances, and for the first time, I saw fear in their eyes. Maybe we should go, Chloe said, her voice trembling. Ryan opened his mouth to reply, but before he could, the whistle grew louder, more deliberate, echoing through the trees like it was circling us. The air felt heavier, colder, the oppressive silence closing in again. Grab your stuff, I said, my voice firm now. We're leaving. We scrambled to pack, but something about the air felt wrong, like it was thickening around us, pressing against my chest. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Every time I glanced at the tree line, I expected to see those pinprick eyes staring back at me. As we moved to leave, I felt a tug of déjà vu, like I had done this before. Like I had already tried the run, only to end up back in the clearing. The thought made my head spin, my pulse quicken. What if... I started, but the words stuck in my throat. What if there was no way out? What if we were already trapped? The whistle came again, piercing and sharp, cutting through my thoughts. This time, it wasn't distant. It was right behind us. Run! I screamed, and we bolted, plunging into the forest. The trees blurred around us, and my heart pounded so loudly I couldn't hear anything else, not the others, not even my own breathing. But as we ran, the forest seemed to shift, the trees warping and twisting like they were alive. I could feel it, some invisible pull drawing us back, no matter which way we went. Then, suddenly, I bursted into a clearing and stopped dead in my tracks. My blood turned to ice. It was the same clearing. The tents were back, the fire smoldering faintly. And standing there by the edge of the woods was Lisa. She turned to look at me, her face calm, her eyes empty, and her lips curled into that same unnatural smile. "Nick," she said softly, her voice carrying on the wind. "You can't leave. You know that." Behind her, the shadows stirred, and those pinprick eyes blinked into existence, one by one. And that's when I realized I wasn't waking up from this, because I had never left. The scream tore through the forest, raw and jagged, cutting through the suffocating stillness like a knife. It wasn't just fear. It was something primal, desperate, the kind of sound that left a mark on your soul.
Sarah!
Josh yelled, his voice crackling as he ran towards the sound. The rest of us stood frozen, the trees pressing around us like a living wall. I wanted to call out, to tell him to stop, but my throat felt locked, the words trapped behind a rising tide of panic. My eyes darted towards Nate, hoping for some kind of plan, but he was pale and trembling, his hand clutching the knife he had pulled from his pack. Then we heard it again. "Help me!" The voice was faint, fractured, but unmistakably Sarah's. It came from somewhere deep in the forest, where the shadows swallowed everything. But something was wrong. "That's not her," Nate whispered, his voice barely audible. Josh didn't stop. He disappeared into the dark, the underbrush snapping and crunching in his wake. I took a step forward, every instinct screaming at me to stay put. "Josh, wait!" The forest didn't answer, but something else did. A low, guttural growl rumbled through the trees, followed by a wet, tearing sound that made my stomach turn. And then silence. A heavy, suffocating silence that wrapped around us like a shroud. 3 hours earlier, we hadn't even known the side trail existed. We were laughing, carefree, our biggest concern being whether we had brought enough water for the loop. The forest felt alive in the way that forests do. Birds chirping, leaves rustling, sunlight filtering through the canopy in golden streams. Josh spotted the trail first. It wasn't really a trail, more like a faint gap between the trees. The undergrowth trampled just enough to suggest that someone or something had passed through recently.
Shortcut!
He said, grinning as he gestured towards it.
This will get us back to the car faster.
I hesitated, staring into the shadowy thicket. Something about it felt wrong, though I couldn't explain why. The others didn't share my unease. "Come on," Sarah said, brushing past me with her phone in hand, already snapping pictures of the moss-covered trees. "What's the worst that could happen?" Looking back, I wish I had stopped them. I wish I had turned around and taken the main trail back to safety. But instead, I followed, my gut twisting as we stepped into the unknown. It didn't take long for the forest to change.
It'll shave an hour off of the loop,
Josh said, peering into the shadowy thicket.
"Trust me."
"We're not supposed to leave the main trail," I countered, though my voice lacked conviction. Something about the path felt wrong. It wasn't overgrown, exactly, but it didn't look like anyone had used it in a while either. By the time I decided to protest, the others were already moving. Even quiet Nate, who usually sided with me, gave me a shrug and trudged after them. I hesitated. That's when I heard it. A sharp crack, like a branch snapping somewhere to our left. Until we heard her scream again, this time farther away, muffled, and abruptly cut off. replaced by uneven ground littered with rocks and gnarled roots that caught at our feet. Then we saw him. Josh was standing off to a flame. "Josh, stop!" I shouted, but it was too late. Both of us breathing hard as we passed on until the forest abruptly opened up into another clearing. It was wrong. Its eyes burned like embers, glowing faintly in the dim light. They didn't blink. Echoing from all sides now, and I realized with dawning horror that they weren't coming from just one creature. There were more. Every shadow seemed to move, every sound twisted into something unnatural. Nate grabbed my hand, pulling me forward as I stumbled over a root, and we bursted through another thicket into an open space. This time, it wasn't a clearing. It was at the edge of a ravine, a sheer drop into blackness that seemed to go on forever. We skidded to a stop, teetering dangerously close to the edge. "Now what?" I gasped, looking frantically for another way out. But the forest was closing in behind us, the howls growing louder, closer. Nate turned to me, his face pale but determined. "We fight it," he said, pulling a hunting knife from his pack. I hadn't even known that he had it. "Fight what?" I demanded, panic bubbling over. "We don't even know what it is." He didn't answer. His eyes were fixed on the forest, and that's when I saw them. Dozens of glowing eyes moving through the trees, too many to count. The creatures were closing in, their distorted shapes weaving between the trunks like smoke. And then, from somewhere deep inside me, something shifted. A strange clarity settled over me, cold and sharp. I picked up a heavy branch from the ground, my hands trembling but steady enough to hold it. If this was the end, we weren't going down without a fight. Nate's knuckles were white as he gripped the knife, his breath coming fast and shallow. I held the branch in front of me like I could actually do something against whatever this was. The glowing eyes moved faster, their light reflecting off something slick and wet. The creatures, if you could even call them that, emerged from the shadows, revealing themselves in the dim, unnatural glow at the ravine's edge. They weren't uniform in shape. Some were tall and impossibly thin, their elongated limbs ending in razor-sharp claws. Others were smaller, hunched, their backs bristled with spikes that jutted out at grotesque angles. Their skin, or whatever passed for skin, was mottled and raw, as if they had been flayed and poorly stitched back together. Worst of all were their faces, or lack thereof. What should have been features were hollow indentations, smeared shadows, or pulsing masses of flesh. The humming sound returned, louder than ever, vibrating through the ground and into my chest. It wasn't just noise. It was pressure, burrowing into my skull and making my vision warp. My grip on the branch faltered, my arms trembling as if the sound was sapping my strength. Nate took a step forward, raising his knife. His voice was a hoarse whisper.
Stay back!
The nearest creature tilted its head as if curious, then opened its mouth. There was no sound, but I could feel it. A palpable wave of dread washing over me. Its mouth was a yawning chasm of jagged teeth, shifting and rearranging themselves like something alive. Another one moved forward, faster than I could follow, its spindly limbs scuttling like a spider's. It lunged at Nate, and he swung the knife wildly, catching it across the torso. A thick black ichor sprayed from the wound, hitting the ground with a hiss and filling the air with the stench of burning hair. The creature shrieked, an ear-piercing, unnatural sound that didn't stop when it should have. The others responded, their guttural cries merging into a deafening cacophony. "Run!" I shouted, grabbing Nate's arm and pulling him back from the advanced swarm. But there was nowhere to run. Behind us was the sheer drop of the ravine, and the creatures were closing in on every side. My mind raced. Let out a deep, resonant growl that vibrated through my bones. One of its massive, root-like limbs reached towards us, stretching impossibly far. For a moment, there was nothing but the rush of air and the pounding of my heart. Then we hit water. Icy, bone-chilling water that knocked the breath from my lungs. The current was strong, dragging us along like rag dolls. I fought to the surface, gasping for air, and caught a glimpse of Nate ahead of me, struggling to keep his head above the water. The ravine walls were high, the trees above a jagged silhouette against the faint light of the moon. The creatures didn't follow. Whatever horror we had left behind seemed bound to the forest, unwilling or unable to chase us into the depths. We floated for what felt like hours before the current slowed, depositing us onto a rocky shore. I crawled onto the slick stones, coughing and shivering, and collapsing beside Nate. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Finally, he broke the silence.
What the hell was that?
I shook my head, unable to answer. The memory of the thing in the clearing, the way it moved, the way it looked at us, was burned into my mind. But worse than that was the feeling, the certainty that it was all over. We had escaped the forest, but something told me